Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Layton, you had mentioned that in Europe there's some different expectations when it comes to privacy. I'd be interested to know how you define privacy in the digital era, and how do we manage the privacy expectations of consumers?
Well, I'm going to give you the research that the European, the Agency for Network Security actually developed, and said that privacy and trust is a function of four things. It's the level of education of the consumer or the user. It is the level and types of technology. It's the business practices and the institutions. And when you look at something like GDPR, it only focuses on two of the four things. So what I would say, if we only did one thing, we as a nation, our individuals, we have to do more to have people be digitally competent and digitally aware. And it's maybe not necessarily something that the Congress defines exactly what it is, but we have a tremendous amount of information and ability to communicate. So, for example, I want to recommend Mr. Chertoff's book, which I just read, and he talked about the first thing, buyer beware. The number one thing in cybersecurity, you have to take responsibility for the platforms, the networks that you use.
So to define privacy in the era that we are in now, this digital era,
right? So
the first thing would be buyer beware.
But taking responsibility,
it's up to each of us to figure
well,
out.
There's a gap right now. There's a gap in what we need to close the gap in terms of the idea of a digital literacy, or what are the 10 things I need to know before I go online to protect myself. And so that is the gap which is missing in the GDPR today. It's what the scientific research shows that's important. And we don't even need to make legislation to do that. We can actually, each and every person can take a step up to take responsibility for what we do online.
So the expectation is that each individual is responsible, and the internet is a space where you take your chances.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the part of the four factors that I mentioned, we're missing 2 out of the 4 right now. Okay, so we have lots of regulations, we have lots of rules on businesses, okay, we have lots of institutions, we're missing education, and we're missing incentives for privacy-enhancing technologies. So I'm trying to promote that as individuals, we take more responsibility for what we do.
Okay, Mr. Secretary, do you feel that a lack of any kind of unified data privacy policy could lead the United States to becoming more isolated?
I do, Senator. I think that, first of all, even within the country, California's now passed a law that deals with the issue of control of data. We could wind up with multi-state laws that are conflicting with each other, at least inconsistent, and certainly would be helpful at least to smooth it out here. But beyond that, to come back to the fundamental point, I recognize that a country like Russia or a country like China is going to be fundamentally different in their attitude to issues like controlling data and controlling information. And so, therefore, there may be limited scope for agreement there. But I do think with Western countries, although their particular approach tends to be different than ours, tends to be much more regulatory, micromanaging, I think the basic value system is very compatible. And that's where I think an ability to reach an agreement as to what our overall objective is would open the door to then working on some of the differences which have created barriers for our businesses, as well as some confusion about what the rules are. So to me, this is about ultimately how do we protect people's rights to make sure their data isn't being used in a way that's contrary to their interests or that invades an area that we think they ought to be in control of.
Many of us on this committee also serve on Armed Services Committee, and we worry about the security of the information that agencies have and that agencies also share. A lot of times civilian agencies don't have the security, say, as the Department of Defense would have. How can we ensure that that information that's out there is more secure? In your role as head of the Secretary of DHS, you were very involved in that. What do we as policymakers need to look for?
I think the challenge here is unity of effort among a lot of different agencies, many of whom don't regard security as a core mission. And unfortunately, Exhibit A is the Office of Personnel Management, which probably everybody in this room was a little bit of a victim of that hack. I do think the administration has made the right decision in designating, in terms of government security, DHS as playing a lead role. And I think it's important to make sure that the department has the authorities necessary to make sure that all the agencies live up to the requirements of basic cyber hygiene and cybersecurity, including continuous diagnosis and monitoring, response plans, and other kinds of elements of a layered defense. So that set of authorities, making sure that's firmly lodged in one accountable agency and that it's appropriately funded, I think would be a big step.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.